Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's going on, Fantasy Champs? How are we doing? My name is Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me as always. It's Poppin' Ricardo.
What's up? What's up?
Oh, I was talking to Rick before the show, and I realized I said something legit on Thursday.
What did you say?
There's just 2 weeks left. I just realized this in my head when I was talking to you. There's just two weeks left until real, meaningful NFL football. Was it Chiefs and...
No, bro. Good try.
Why did I say Chiefs? Jeez, in my head, they won the Super Bowl.
Who won the Super Bowl?
The Rams. The Rams and who?
Yep. The Bills.
Oh, yeah, dude. That's a great
Rams
game.
And Bills.
I'm not going to have anyone from either team.
This is a slight complaint before we really get going here, just from me to you.
Yeah.
I got some Snapchat memories of us drafting our drafts from like 2 years ago and 3 years ago, like 5 days ago. So we used to draft like August 20th, and now we draft in September, and it kind of annoys me a little bit.
That's okay. I love it. I think it's more fun.
Oh, but now like the ADPs, like I was gonna get Alvin Kamara in the second round. That was gonna happen. Now it's not happening. Now he's gonna go in the first. Sean's taking him in the first round now.
100%.
And I'm not taking him at 9.
I was gonna say I like it because injuries don't really. Which, by the way, no, I'm not gonna say that. I don't want to jinx anything, so I won't say it. But drafting in September, we're literally going to draft September 5th, and then the first football game is 3 days later.
Yep.
That's great. I don't have to wait 2 weeks and sit there and twiddle my thumbs and hope football comes. I'll do my draft, and then things will happen. Just wait until it's September, the first Thursday night football game. We do it then, right before the game starts.
Right.
But anyway, so today, the season is fast approaching, but today we're going to talk about, last week at one point we talked about our I guess it was my top 3 riskiest running backs because Rick was not here. But we're going to talk about our top 3 riskiest wide receivers for the 2022 fantasy football season. Before we jump into that, check out our website, fantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcast platforms, please leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, like, and comment down below your top 3 riskiest wide receivers for 2022. And let us know if you agree with the guys that we have on this list. So without further ado, let's jump right in. We're going to try to keep these episodes short and concise for you because, man, some of them, I talked by myself for 30 minutes, Rick.
I don't know how you do it.
No, I don't. I honestly don't know how I do it. It was like I was talking to you. But you were the camera.
Right.
But anyway. So, yeah, we're going to try to keep this short and concise. Get you the content that you want rather quickly. But anyway, let's start off with the first riskiest wide receiver for fantasy football in 2022, and that is Michael Thomas. Rick was a little bit more hesitant on this because this is a player I think he wants to buy late in the middle of the draft in the home league.
I would draft him.
Have you been mocking him in the home league?
Occasionally.
Okay, all right. So, I discussed this on the last show with Michael Thomas. Not Michael Thomas, with the riskiest wide receivers. Obviously, these players, like, we're not counting them as busts. There are players that we aren't drafting, and there's a show for that. We're going to release it, I think, the week of the NFL season starting. But the riskiest players are just guys that they're kind of like busts, but they're guys that carry a lot of risk. And there's some guys that Rick likes to take the big risk on. So I'll let him defend his risks. But Rick, why is Michael Thomas a risky wide receiver?
I think the big thing with Michael Thomas is injuries and the fact that he hasn't really been the same player in a couple of years. He was great. His last great season, he was the wide receiver 1 in all of fantasy in 2019. Then 2020 happened, and he was disappointing already. Yeah, he wasn't bad, but he just didn't have any touchdowns, so he wasn't like great. I don't think he was a wide receiver 1, if I remember correctly. He was a wide receiver 2 before he got injured, and he didn't play at all last season. And there was reports of him saying that he was ready to go, and then he has a setback. He has another setback. He has another setback. And all year it was like, when is Michael Thomas coming back? And he never played a single game. Yep. So obviously there's worrisome this year because we don't know if he's actually going to play. Everybody's saying he's healthy. He's ready to go. There was reports in training camp that he looked like the old Michael Thomas. I think the head coach, Dennis Allen, actually said that. Like, he hasn't missed a beat or something like that. And the hype train was back on. And then he has another hamstring injury in practice. And I don't think it's serious. It's just a minor hamstring injury, but it's Michael Thomas. So who knows? It feels like this year, if you draft Michael Thomas, he's just like a hamstring or a minor foot injury away from just being shut down again and being done. Yeah. So there's definitely a risk factor, but every guy on this list, I think I would draft Michael Thomas because of his ceiling and the player that I know that he's capable of being. And if he does end up playing and he's healthy throughout all 17 games, I think that he's going to have a really good year. So I would still probably draft Michael Thomas at his ADP on Sleeper, which is 6th round. So I would still take him in the 6th round. But if he starts moving up boards, I'm definitely a little bit iffy about it. And there's without a doubt risk to the pick.
Yeah. I obviously agree because it's our list.
And you're the one that made
it. Kind of. We work together.
Yeah.
Anyway. But no, I do think that there's significant concern for me, not just from the injury perspective, but the fact that he hasn't played football in 2 years. The last time he played football, Drew Brees was throwing him the ball.
Right.
And that's the last time we saw Michael Thomas. And I have the same concerns about a player like Desean Watson coming back after missing he missed 17 games last year, and then he missed 11. He's going to miss 11 this year. And that's 28 games that he has not played an NFL game.
Almost 2 seasons.
Almost 2 full seasons, yeah. So, Michael Thomas is kind of in that same boat where he hasn't played for 2 full seasons. And he is currently at the age of 29 years old. So, this is, it's not the end. What is Cooper Kupp's 29, right? I'm just going to check that really quick.
Yeah.
You can have at age 28 or 29 of your career a really good fantasy football
Adams
season.
is 29. Devontae Adams.
Yeah. So it's you can still have some really, really large amounts of success. But when you start stacking injuries year over year, that's when things start becoming problems. 2020, he had the high ankle sprain. He missed 7 games because of it. And then he got to week 7, and then he had a hamstring injury that caused him to miss 2 games. And I believe that was the injury that held him out for the rest of the season in 2020. I can't remember because he didn't play for a large.
That was a foot injury.
Yeah, but
I don't know.
Either way, missed the rest of the 2020 season, and then he had an ankle rehabilitation in preseason of 2021, and then another ankle surgery to go along with that in the preseason of this year, and now he's dealing with a hamstring injury, and it's where there's smoke, there's fire. And one thing I've been trying to do as a fantasy analyst and as a fantasy football player is look at injury risk and be like, okay, it's not worth investment in a guy that is constantly getting hurt. You know what I mean? So if they're especially with the hamstring injuries, if there's a hamstring injury before the season starts, it's likely to spring up again during the regular season. It might just be 1 or 2 games, which is fine. I'm not gonna.
Mike Evans is a classic example of that.
Mike Evans always misses 2 games, so
with a hamstring.
So Michael Thomas could be fine, but there are so many circulating changes with not just the injury stuff, but the fact that, Sean Payton's not there anymore. Drew Brees is not there anymore. You have a new head coach. He's not installing a new offensive system, which is good, but you do have a new head coach. You have Jameis Winston, who's going to most likely play the whole season. Hopefully he stays healthy. And there's some good things to look forward to. Rick's a little higher on the Saints than I am, but I think there's some good things that the Saints have for them. And so if their offense ends up being good and things work out and Michael Thomas is good, then it's not a bad pick. But I think the range of outcomes for Michael Thomas are complete flailing problem and not even a top 24 wide receiver, and maybe a guy that finishes in the top 12. And the range of outcomes is so wide for him that makes him risky. That he could just completely collapse this year and you could get burned. And when you're talking about a 5th round pick, I like guys like Allen Robinson better than him. I like guys like I'm trying to scroll and see ADP properly, but I like guys like Allen Robinson better than him. I like Marquise Brown better than him. I like Juju Smith-Schuster better than him. I like Darnell Mooney, Rashad Bateman. I think the list will stop at that point, but I started scrolling down further, and I was like, oh, these guys suck.
That's still a full round, though. I think after
it's like a full round or two, and to me, it's like I'm not worth. To me, it's not worth that ADP risk to take Michael Thomas. And I know a lot of people, maybe watching this video, preparing for your drafts, are looking at this going, okay, well, Michael Thomas was a top 10, 3 years ago, I think it was. He was the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football. He can do that again. And I'm like, maybe. He also had Drew Brees and Sean Payton.
Yeah.
In an established system. So I just think there's a lot of risk to be had with Michael Thomas. It's not necessarily a horrible draft selection. You're not wasting a 2nd round pick on him.
Right.
So there's that. But yeah, Michael Thomas, riskiest wide receiver. Anything else you want to say about him?
No, I think that those are all fair points. I would still reiterate though that I would draft him.
Okay. Rick likes Michael Thomas. I want a whole tweet thread or a TikTok about him.
I don't know if I'll go that far.
He's like, I'm not gonna stand. But anyway, number 2 is DK Metcalf. And this one is I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
I think there was an interesting question I heard the other day, which was so a lot of people have the equivalent comparison when it comes to this player, but DK Metcalf or AJ Brown, like they're similar players.
Yeah.
So they always have that same kind of projection, or not projection, but I'm like, my computer just glitched out and it distracted me. They have the same play style. So people look at them and they're like, oh yeah, these two players are the same. So would you rather draft AJ Brown in the 2nd, maybe early 3rd round? Okay. Maybe 3rd to mid 3rd round. Take him with the excitement and the energy and then have him underperform his ADP, or take DK Metcalf and have him overperform his ADP with that being in his range of outcomes?
I'm a little confused on what you're asking me here, but I'm going to say I would rather take AJ Brown, obviously, because I trust him more and I trust the offense more than Seattle.
It's more or less a ceiling or floor argument. Like, there's a really good chance that AJ Brown is really good and he's fine, which I believe. But then there's a good chance that he completely crumbles like he did last year and ends up a wide receiver 26. And then you have DK Metcalf, who people are just way, way down on. And he could be like, oh, you know what? I'm going to outperform that and end up top 20. And then all of a sudden, Metcalf in the 5th looks way better than AJ Brown in the 3rd or 2nd.
Yeah.
So
I mean, Metcalf is what pick? I think he's like 4th or 5th right now in Sleeper.
He's early.
He's a late 4th.
Yeah, late 4th, early 5th.
Yeah, and to me, that's
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're going to draft a Seahawks receiver, I definitely would rather Metcalf over Lockett.
Yeah.
But I just don't want to draft a wide receiver who's going to be on an offense that probably is going to throw the ball the least amount of times in the NFL.
Yeah.
They were down there last year. They were last in plays ran.
Yep.
So they're going to be a slow-paced offense that is a run-first offense. So they're probably going to have the least amount of pass attempts. I believe they were in the bottom 3 last season.
So they'll just replicate what they did.
The difference is, instead of Russell Wilson being your quarterback, so at least you could have some efficiency, it's going to be Geno Smith or Drew Lock. So the efficiency goes away.
This is what makes DK Metcalf a massive risk. You lost Russell Wilson. You can be as elite as you want to be.
Fantastic wide receiver.
He's a great wide receiver.
Probably going to have, he might have a game where he gets 30 fantasy points because he's going to take a slant 80 yards.
Yep.
But
he's a great wide receiver. But being in an offense that doesn't pass it a lot, that isn't going to be efficient, like at least what you had with Russ is they ran the ball a lot, but Russ made ridiculous 45-yard throws down the field to DK Metcalf in the back of the end zone.
Mm-hmm.
And then he scored 7, 8, 9 touchdowns on the year. So there was plus to DK Metcalf. A.J. Brown's the same player, always in a run-first scheme. It's probably because he's big-bodied, thick wide receiver that works great in the blocking game for running backs on the outside. But
yeah.
So for DK Metcalf though, it's just the massive risk is that you're taking with this player is that he basically lost his entire ecosystem of production at the wide receiver position with Russell Wilson going. And so by taking him and expecting what he did last year, or maybe even like a light version of what he did last year, or maybe not last year, but in years past, it's kind of a fool's errand. And when you draft him, you have to anticipate, like drafting at DK Metcalf in the 5th or 6th round at this point, because there comes a point where you're like, okay, Metcalf becomes a value.
Right.
The further he drops
eventually,
down draft.
he does. Yeah.
But like with Metcalf, if you end up taking him, the more likely outcome is that he doesn't even finish in the top 15, 16, 17, or 18, and he ends up like mid-20s even to some extent. And that's really down on DK Metcalf. But I mean,
that's where I have him.
In years, like Denver throws the ball more than the Seattle Seahawks do, right?
Yeah.
And Denver couldn't carry 2 wide receiver ones. They couldn't even carry 1 wide receiver one with Drew Lock. So, like, I don't think that Metcalf is going to be, like, I think there's, like, mid-20s is really, like, that's the floor dropping off because the Seattle Seahawks are just complete trash and they're going for Bryce Young. But I think he could be, like, a Terry McLaurin low-end wide receiver, too. Where he always lands 18, 19, or 20.
Sure.
I think that's what Metcalf is. If you're drafting him with anticipation, like, oh man, people are letting Metcalf fall to the 5th round, and I'm going to snag him, and you're like, no, you're not. You're not getting that. You're more or less getting a floor play than you are getting a ceiling play.
Right. This is the thing about Metcalf is with those stats that I was saying, the team still was able to have 30 total passing touchdowns last year. That's not going to happen this year. I mean, I would expect about 20 passing touchdowns to maybe at best 25.
Yeah.
Which even then I don't think is going to happen. Which is still a lot less touchdowns. He had 12 last year. He had a good year last year. 12 touchdowns. He had 129 targets, and he was the wide receiver 13. So now all of a sudden you take away 4 or 5 touchdowns.
Yeah. And
you might take away 5 or 10 targets.
Mm-hmm.
Which isn't a lot, but it's going to make a difference. He goes from wide receiver 13 to like to the mid-20s. I mean, and that's kind of just where he's going to be, in my opinion.
So, I mean, when you talk about ADP, really quickly, because we got to move on to the next guy. But when you talk about the ADP right now, he is going off the board as like the 18th, 16th to 18th wide receiver, I believe, if my math is correct.
There's about 6 or 7 receivers that are going after him right now that I would take over him, maybe even more. Yeah. I would say 6 or 7.
So, I mean, do what you will with that situation and that information, but he's definitely one of the riskiest wide receivers that people are drafting this year. Number 3, and the final guy that we have is none other than, and this is going against the cultural grain of most fantasy advice.
We're going to have a cult after us on this one.
Yes, we're going to have people ready to burn down our houses. But it is Gabe Davis, who is, and I'm not going to lie, I've mocked at least drafting DK Metcalf. There's been times where I mocked Michael Thomas. There has not been one mock draft, one best ball, or one dynasty league that I have drafted Gabe Davis. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a horrible bad thing.
Yep.
So, to me, it's very simple with Gabe Davis. There just hasn't been, his ceiling is not as high as people think it is. And
Correct.
B, I'll go B and C. B, I think that Gabe Davis is Rick is probably going to bring up his best ball ADP, but is really high. And if you get a Gabe Davis stan in your draft, that he's going to get drafted in the 4th round. It's easy money. That's what's going to happen. 4th, 5th round. And the final thing is, no matter what you think of the player, Gabe Davis, or the Buffalo Bills, I should say, with Josh Allen at quarterback over the last 3 years. So I would say the 3 best seasons of his career. Josh Allen has not carried 2 wide receiver 1s or 2 wide receiver 2s even. He's carried a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 3 almost every season. So Diggs, wide receiver 7 last year. Beasley was the next best Buffalo Bill at wide receiver 47. In 2020, Diggs was wide receiver 3. Beasley just outside that top 24 at wide receiver 2. Wide receiver 26. And then 2019, John Brown, wide receiver 20, and Beasley, wide receiver 34. So the Bills don't carry 2, despite the fact that they throw the ball a lot, they don't normally carry 2 wide receiver 1s. And now you're saying, okay, Gabe Davis is more talented than Beasley and John Brown and some of these other guys that he's had. And that may be true. If I go over to reception perception and I tell you that he was against man coverage 33rd percentile, he had a 33rd percentile success rate against man, 27th percentile against zone, and 36th percentile against press in 2021, and that was an improvement on his rookie season. I just don't see how the infatuation and the love for this player has come to fruition in the way that it has. I think you're taking a massive, a massive risk in taking this player. I just there's no two ways about it. And if you're taking him in the 4th round, you're wasting a draft pick on a player that you could have spent not even on somebody that is even less risky, but a guy that has a higher ceiling. Does this guy have a top 5 ceiling? No. Does he have a top 12 ceiling? Maybe barely. Mid-range wide receiver 2 would be a really good season for Gabe Davis. Right. That would be successful to me.
Me too.
And if you're drafting him in the 4th round and that's what you're getting, I don't like that. When you could be drafting guys that have a ceiling way higher than that.
Yeah. No, you make good points. I mean, a lot of people's argument with Gabe Davis is his ceiling and the vacated targets that are there. Mm-hmm. But, and I told you this before the show, Cole Beasley has a lot of those vacated targets and he plays the slot. So that's going to go to Jameson Crowder or Isaiah McKenzie.
Yeah.
Sure, he'll have more targets than those guys. He's going to take Emmanuel Sanders targets and that kind of role. But Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders last year combined for 5 touchdowns. Dawson Knox had 9. I don't think that's changing. Stephon Diggs had 10, which for those of you who don't know, he had 34 red zone targets. So his efficiency, as a lot of people have pointed out in the offseason, was very low. He could have easily had like 14 or 15 touchdowns this past year. So yeah. I don't think that's changing. I think Diggs is still the one in the red zone, and Knox is going to get his fair share. So I don't think Gabe Davis is going to be a guy who's going to get, some people think he's going to be a touchdown machine and going to get like 11, 12 touchdowns. I don't think that's going to happen. He had 6 last year. Maybe he gets, I think I projected him at 7 or 8. So I think there's sure a slight increase, but I don't think he's going to get a huge touchdown mark. He has a low catch percentage. It's not going to change.
Yeah.
So let's say he gets 115 targets. He's still not going to get a ton of receptions because of that low percentage. So not to mention the fact that on Underdog Best Ball, as you pointed out, he's actually fallen in drafts. Okay. He's fallen in drafts.
Fallen. Okay. All right.
At pick 42.
Oh boy. That's a third round pick in 12
yeah,
team.
He was at like 38. Now he's at 42. Which is still way too high. Way too high. I mean, there's a lot of receivers I'd rather have over him. On Sleeper, it's much better. His ADP, I think, is pick 74. But even then, there's risk because he's going in the same range as Juju, as Darnell Mooney, as Rashad Bateman, as Adam Thielen, as D-Hop when he comes back. And to me, I just don't know if I'm drafting him over those guys. And this is coming from someone who has Gabe Davis in a couple dynasty leagues. I'm not against Gabe Davis. I just think he's been way overhyped, way overhyped. People saw the playoff game. People see that the role that he's getting himself into, and have instantly just flown him up draft boards. And I don't think that should be the case. A good player, I would agree with you. I think a mid wide receiver 2 finish would be a really good year. I think he's going to have maybe in a 12 team, a low end wide receiver 2 finish. Maybe he's around like 20 to 25, maybe even 30, somewhere in the 20 to 30 range. Which is a good season and a much better year than he's had his first 2 years of his career, and he's going to continue to get better. Yeah. But he's not at the point where you should be drafting him in best ball leagues in the first few rounds.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. The other thing I was going to say is these other guys around Gabe Davis, Hopkins when he comes back. I don't like to invest in suspended players, so I haven't drafted I haven't drafted any DeAndre Hopkins, but he's the wide receiver 1 in Arizona. Bateman is the wide receiver 1 in Baltimore. Mooney is the wide receiver 1 in Chicago. Juju Smith-Schuster is the wide receiver 1 in Kansas City.
Yep.
Even Drake London. I'm not drafting him because Atlanta's going to blow, but he's at least the wide receiver 1 in Atlanta. There is no
Elijah
chance.
Moore, wide receiver 1 on the Jets.
Exactly.
Arguably.
Gabe Davis has 0 chance of being the wide receiver 1 on the Buffalo Bills.
Unless Diggs tears his ACL, that's
right.
That's
Unless that's the only way to his
injury.
Diggs getting hurt. He's not overtaking Diggs.
No, he's not
for that role. And I said this to Rick before the show. I think Dawson Knox benefits from the vacated target share more than Gabe Davis does, to be honest with you, because you see the wide receivers that I've listed here, the secondary wide receivers. If those guys had that kind of leeway or target share in a game, then I would be more inclined to be like, okay, if he had 2 top 24 wide receivers, I would have been like, okay, Gabe Davis has a shot, but he has not carried 2 of those guys. So this would be against the norm. And I think Gabe Davis in the 7th, not a bad selection.
No, I'm not going to get on anybody for taking Gabe Davis in the 7th round.
Gabe Davis in the 4th is a horrible selection. So.
I will on the 4th, right?
But anyway, so unless you have any more thoughts, Rick, I'll conclude the show.
No, I think that's about it.
There we go. Our top 3 riskiest players for the wide receiver position in fantasy football 2022. We got a lot of content coming out this week. We got some more TikToks. We got some must draft players in the early rounds, and we got a mock draft on Thursday. We'll see you later, guys.
See you.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.